So you've moved.
I have moved. I'm coming at you. Hopefully the space isn't too echoey on the recording. Nothing is set up yet. It's a much bigger space. But I figured this podcast is making tons of money now.
Mm-hmm.
We're just raking it in with all of the money that we're getting from doing the show. So I figured, why not? I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm going to buy what is almost certainly going to be the most expensive thing I will ever buy in my entire life, which would be a house. So I have a house. And when I say I buy it, I mean Emily bought it, because the bank did not want to take my YouTuber money. They were like, that's not a real job.
Yeah. Oh boy. I had the same problem.
Yeah.
Where anytime you try to do anything when it comes to like loaning, like anything that has to do with collateral or needing verification, like this came up when looking for a place to rent too. Anytime somebody asks you what your job is, you have to be like, all right, sit down. It's going to take 5 minutes.
I promise you it's a real job. I promise you I make money. They did not care. They did not care even a little bit.
That's the life of being in a new industry that didn't exist when we were children.
But here's the thing, Tristan. I'm coming at you live. I'm coming at you from high-speed fiber optic internet right now.
Me too. I got fiber optic a couple weeks ago. Yeah, this is now a high fiber podcast.
It is.
It's the brand muffin of podcasts.
You listen to this podcast to keep you regular. That's what we're about on this show.
Welcome to the Metamucil cast. This music slides in and out of you like...
That's right. In and out, nice and smooth. We are going to... I feel like our banter is going to be quicker. We don't have to wait on each other, the slow speeds of the internet, I say a joke, it takes you a couple seconds to respond and laugh, and then we move on. Now I'm going to tell a joke, and you're going to start laughing before I even finish the punchline. That's how fast the internet connection's going to be. It's like it's transcending time. It knows what I'm going to say before I say it.
I agree, and also doubly so, because that is the reason why it would take me so long to laugh.
Yeah, it was only because of the internet connection and not because of my jokes being less than stellar. It was just the internet.
Yep.
All right, we got to fix the internet. That was a bit of a long pause. Maybe we got to reboot the router or something here. Let's do the podcast. Let's see how this high fiber podcast comes together.
Yes, hi, this is the Brandcast. This is the whole wheat cast.
This is the whole wheat cast just for adults. It's like when you go to IHOP and you get the pancakes that are just for older people, it'll be like the whole wheat bran nut pancakes. And that's what this podcast is.
Yep. Now that we're both in our 30s, whole wheat is important to us.
We need it. This is a podcast called It's Probably Not Aliens. And we take a look at ancient aliens and ancient astronaut theory, and we look at their claims while also mostly debunking them and really just learning about the really cool history behind the real life people, places, things, time periods, all this cool stuff. We learn a lot, and it's not because of me. My name is Scott Nicewander. I know nothing. I come into this podcast, normally I say like a fresh baby boy, but I think we've established multiple times in this intro that I am not a baby boy. I'm an ancient soul.
You're a baby to your 30s, and your 30s.
That's true.
This is the trick: is that as a person who will be turning 35 this year, that your 30s is a new phase of life, and so you're kind of a baby to being a full established grown up.
That's true. I'm a baby 30-year-old. That's fair. So wise from the ancient 30-year-old over there.
Probably should say your name though.
I did say my name. I said my name.
I'm
Scott
Tristan, and I remember things that happened 10 seconds ago. Apparently, I'm Tristan Johnson, and I do the thing where I look up stuff and spiral until somehow an episode comes out of my episode glands. It's a painful process, but
we've not recorded in a week. Those glands have been backed up. So
yeah, it's true. Oof, lots of content coming out today. Yeah, because you've been moving.
I've been moving. That's why we're late on things. So apologies for late episodes these last couple couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting it back together.
Yeah, getting the band back together. So yeah, we're going to talk.
Speaking of bands,
we're going to talk about the Foo Fighters today, which is a thing that people have probably. This is an interesting case of where something named after the Foo Fighters has since become more popular than the actual phenomenon it's named after. So we have to start by inevitably getting out of the way that we're talking about the Foo Fighters today, and it's not the band, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the band so that we can get in before approximately the entire internet tells us about the Foo Fighters band.
Please do.
So yes, for those who don't know, the Foo Fighters, the band, is a band that was started by Dave Grohl, who was the drummer for Nirvana. And then in April of 1994, there was an abrupt breakup of the group for reasons that are for interesting reasons that have to do with the abrupt exiting of the band by the head Kurt Cobain.
That's a way to put it. Yeah.
And so after that, Dave Grohl started his own project. It was sort of a solo musical thing as a way to sort of deal with the loss of his friend, because I realize now that 1994 is long enough ago that like who am I even shitting? Neither of us remember 1994, but
no, it was almost 30 years ago.
But it was recent history when we were kids, so enough that it stuck in our head. But there are people now, there are like, Zoomers who probably might not even know who Kurt Cobain was. So Kurt Cobain was a very popular singer who committed suicide in 1994. That's sort of the thing that I was dancing around there. So Dave recorded a bunch of songs to sort of deal with his grief as a solo project. And for his first album, he literally recorded every single instrument on his own, with the exception of like one little guitar spot.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And also did this in less than a week.
Okay, well, you don't have to make me feel bad about my accomplishments, Dave Grohl.
Well, if you're going to be always comparing yourself to Dave Grohl, you'll be you're going to always be disappointed. But apparently he was a big UFO head and was really into reading stuff about UFOs. So when he made his debut album for this, what he thought was going to be a temporary one-man solo project, right? Like just like a one-off thing, he called his band the Foo Fighters, sort of as a gaffe, because he basically thought that the band would only last for about a month and a half. So he named it what he quoted as the dumbest band name ever.
That's funny.
And now it's now more associated with Dave Grohl and the band than like the actual thing that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I know people love Foo Fighters. I know one song from Foo Fighters, and it's probably not their most popular one. It's just a song that I listened to on repeat in the year 2000. And I did look it up just to make sure that it was even a little bit popular. But it's the song Breakout. I like that song a lot. Is good. Do you know any songs from Foo Fighters?
No, but Foo Fighters is one of those bands where, because I tried listening to a little bit before, it's one of those things where like you have heard the Foo Fighters by osmosis. It's
that's
it's
what
that
I feel
song
like.
by that guy. Yeah. Like their biggest song is Everlong, which if you just hear the opening guitar chords, you're like, oh yeah, it's that song.
Okay, I'm sure there is that. I'm sure if people play me some hit songs from the Foo Fighters, I would be like, oh no, I do know this one.
Mm-hmm. They are perpetually a band that has songs that are reasonably popular that you're like, oh, it's that. Okay. That song that you had heard but never really thought too much about.
Right.
Now some real Foo Fighter fans are going to be up in arms over that.
People are going to hate us. Let's talk about the Alien versions.
Yes. So here's the whole thing with the Foo Fighters.
What is Foo Fighters? I've never understood. When I was a kid and I heard Foo Fighters, I thought they were missing a D, and I thought it was Food Fighters, like a food fight, like you'd get it in the movie Max Keeble, like you'd get a bit of some food fighting. But no, it's Foo Fighters. I don't know what that means.
Everybody loves Kung Fu Fighters. Okay,
but it's FOO.
Yeah.
Not FU.
Basically, what it was is that during World War II, there were reports by military pilots of seeing strange lights and objects in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that they were either some form of advanced World War II technology, so we're kind of following up directly on last week's episode, but also the theory that these are mysterious extraterrestrials, which is an interesting prospect because it was seen on both sides of the war. So we have reports from the Germans and Japanese seeing Foo Fighters as well. And
gotcha.
And also it's sort of like, because 1947 is Roswell, it's right before the big UFO explosion. So what's going on here?
What is going on here?
What is a Foo Fighter? And this became a big deal. People were trying to figure out what they were, and eventually they ended up getting it called Foo Fighters, and the debate went on for decades about what these things actually are. So here's the claim that
Hit me with it.
Foo Fighters stick out as being strange because they behave unnaturally. They had characteristics not consistent with aircraft or technology at the time, like high speed, unusual maneuvers, and the ability to change their shape or color. People were not able to identify or explain what they were. The military never actually came to a conclusion as to what they were, which makes people think that they might be aliens.
Alien.
Also, they were reported by multiple pilots and witnesses, so that makes their accounts more credible as to being like, not just one guy's story.
Yeah.
And there's, according to ancient astronaut believers or UFO people, I guess this is a
just
quotation marks around ancient, but
yeah.
But like the idea is that there's not a lot of great compelling natural explanations as to what this could be. So some are like saying that either this is aliens or some sort of high-tech hidden technology, and that the military is just covering it up. So that's like the long short end of like what people are trying to claim as the Foo Fighter phenomenon.
Gotcha. All right. So Foo Fighters are just like, is this like a different just word for like UFO basically?
It's basically it was basically a term for UFO before the term UFO existed.
Gotcha. All right. So just like weird stuff weird flying things in the sky that can change color and shape and like fly around in weird patterns and things. We don't know what they are.
Yeah, if you want to solidify it all together, Foo Fighters is essentially people who spotted, especially fighter pilots, spotting what they think are UFOs during World War II, and basically fitting that whole description of like what it is.
Yeah.
And there's still debate to this day as to what they are. So I'm going to get into a little bit of all of that, especially getting into some context about what the Foo Fighters are and what...
You said the magic word for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that when I read over the arguments and everything like that, I came to the conclusion that understanding the context of what's going on here and will give you a better idea as to why people might have seen something like this. And it will, to me, even if we don't have a perfect natural explanation, give you at least a few things that are at least more compelling than, again, as I seem to say every episode, that somehow an alien species has figured out how to travel faster than the fastest possible speed in the universe and decided to dedicate centuries, millennia of time to travel the vast oceans of space between wherever they're from and our sun. And the only thing that they decided to do when they got here is just kind of zip around and look at stuff.
Yeah, like a little tourist. They're just like, oh, this is Earth, huh? Wow. It's a lot of people just zipping around.
Got their little fun. Especially it's like during World War II, they're like, oh, look, they're putting on a little show. What's all this about?
Oh, this is fun. Oh, look at them. They're like fighting. That's cute.
What's interesting about that actually is this does give me some memories of, this is going to get some spice. A book series that is very popular in extremely niche circles, but I have tried to read like 3 times and it is just unreadable to me. And that is an alternate history novel series by Harry Turtledove, who is like the biggest alternate history author, where aliens invade the Earth during World War II.
Okay.
Like in the middle of World War II.
All right.
But the aliens are from like a species that does not believe in like they're very traditional and their technology develops very slowly. So the last time they saw humans, they saw like medieval knights and they're like, oh, these guys are going to be pushovers. And then they show up and all of a sudden they're like, the technology of humans has advanced huge amounts in like the short amount of time in their minds, and they're like, what the hell? And then as they attack World War II, first of all, the very problematic thing of the as a necessity to fight the aliens, the Axis and the Allies put aside their differences to fight the aliens.
Yeah, you know no.
The cover of one of the books of the series is like Hitler and Stalin and Winston Churchill and FDR like in a room together plotting to fight against the aliens, and I'm like,
wow,
no good.
Wow, this has Watchmen vibes a little bit.
Yeah. So the aliens invade, and there's like multiple books about this. This is the problem with alternate history for the most part, is that the books tend to be more fun to hear about than to actually read, because the book I'm talking about has like 20 plus POV characters, and at least one of them is a baseball player for some reason. So
does he hit a home run that hits an alien spaceship and has it come crashing to the ground? Because that would be fun.
I don't know, because I can never get more than 100 pages into it, because
I want to read a story where it's Sandlot but with aliens. Everyone give me that story.
Sandlot with aliens?
Yeah.
Which one's Sandlot?
Sandlot?
No.
Sandlot's the one with James Earl Jones. And it's like all the kids and they try to get the ball back from the big dog.
Aliens in the outfield?
That's something.
Yeah.
We could do something with that.
The episode of Deep Space Nine where they fight, what's it called? Where they do baseball? There's a baseball episode of Deep Space Nine.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. We're in the middle of an intergalactic war. The cast of Deep Space Nine goes into a baseball competition against a guy that Captain Sisko met in like commander school, who like basically thought he was dumb because it was a human because the other guy was a Falcon. And so they do a whole baseball tournament against this other team. It's one of the greatest episodes of Deep Space Nine. Anyways,
fantastic.
So that was my whole.
We're getting distracted.
Yeah, that was my whole thing about the book In the Balance and about alternate history. So, anyways, the Foo Fighter phenomenon happened at the peak of the Second World War, thing you might have heard about, and was reported by both members of the Axis and Allies, which means that two sides of the war that weren't necessarily talking to each other were reporting on events going on that worked. They were given the name Foo Fighters by the Americans.
Okay, this is my question. What does it mean?
The country that called films movies because the pictures move gave them the nickname Foo Fighters, because this is wild. It actually kind of touches into Scott's territory.
Yeah, okay.
So there was this comic strip by Bill Holman called Smokey Stover.
Okay.
And in that there was a term called just like Foo. There's like a Foo character that was just like a sort of word used by Holman in the comic strips to reference things that were strange or unusual. And this comic strip was really popular to the point where people were actually painting pictures of Smokey Stover and a character called Spooky on the nose of their airplanes, kind of like on bomber aircraft. You've seen that kind of thing, and like, you know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And so I guess because that's a term for things that are strange or unusual, that's where the nickname Foo came from for Foo Fighters.
That's interesting. I've never heard of this. I'm more of a comic book guy than a comic strip guy, but I gotta admit, comic strips, a lot of fun history there.
And they were really popular in the 40s too.
Absolutely.
Long before Garfield at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's no comic books really at this point. Because, they weren't around until 30.
World War II was
like
happening
37?
by then.
Yeah.
This is the 1940s, so they're Superman firmly exists.
Superman exists.
Captain America was literally made as propaganda during this war, if I remember correctly. So there are comic books, just they're like, 10-cent things that 8-year-olds buy. So that's like, keep in mind, like, huge deal. For those who don't know, which might be because Americans only really get half of the story here, but World War II was basically the largest war in human history before or since. Hopefully for a long time that is the case. It began in 1939 when the German Republic, which was under the fascist rule of Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. The war then quickly spread through Europe and eventually engulfed the entire world, more or less. 2 years later, after because the war started in September of 1939, 2 years later, in December of 1941, the Japanese, which were running out of oil to fight the war effort against the Chinese and the British in mainland China, reacted to the Americans cutting off their trade with Japan for oil supplies by trying to quickly knock the United States out of trying to take a side of the war by bombing Pearl Harbor, and got very much the opposite reaction. Their whole idea was if they just destroyed the American Pacific Fleet, that America, which was already at this point neutral in the war, would back off. I say neutral. They were not that neutral. They just weren't actively fighting. But either way, it resulted in the United States declaring war on the Emperor of Japan, and at the same time also getting involved in Europe. And yeah. But
now it's our problem. There's that, you ever watch, I always think of that Robot Chicken sketch, do you know what I'm talking about? Where it's like all the countries are represented as like kids in a like elementary school classroom.
Oh,
and
no.
like, yeah, all the countries in Europe are like fighting, and America's like, it's not my problem. And then, yeah, like the kid representing Japan like spills his milk or something. He's like, now it's my problem.
Oh, I think I have seen that, but you knocked loose a very, very old memory there.
Yeah.
But one of the things about this war that I think is important to note, especially for this situation, is that World War II saw levels of destruction on a scale that we can't even comprehend today. Furthermore, during the war, as there was a constant struggle to economically and technologically defeat the opponents, basically every side of the war was rapidly trying to develop and produce new and more powerful weapons of war, including the war ending with America developing the most destructive weapon of war ever conceived.
A baseball player who could hit alien craft out of the sky. Only America could think of it.
He was from Manhattan. That's why they called it the Manhattan Project. But one of the things that's important for understanding in this situation is that it was one of the big wars that used for the first time, I shouldn't say for the first time for some of these, but at least extremely developed a lot of these technologies that have to do with radar and radio and like lots of communication technologies. Because the last big war, World War I, ended in 1918. And in 1918, radio was nowhere close to where it needed to be like a mass use of communication. I think there were still telegraph lines and stuff like that during that war.
Yeah, you had to put like wires down and such. Yeah.
So this is the first war that has radar tracking, that has radio communication, and it seemed like every other month there was some new weapon that was coming off of the assembly line in one country or the other. Not as much as World War I, but still, which World War I started like 2 years after the Wright brothers and then ended with like fighter planes. So way bigger deal. But either ways, it means that technology, especially in aviation, was in a rapid state of development, including radar, used to detect enemy aircraft and ships, and communication. The military also were basically inventing new planes and stuff like that were faster and more maneuverable over and over again. So we were like every other month seeing a new airplane that could move faster, maneuver faster than anything that had ever been seen before. Which, then when you see that the Foo Fighters, when people are seeing Foo Fighters, they might be like thinking like, oh, this is like just the next step because we keep seeing these new step ups in technology over and over again. So these might be this is just be the new thing that people are putting out.
This is it. Yeah.
Also important to mention is for very notable reasons, the pilots, a lot of them who saw Foo Fighters were under what I could only call extreme amounts of stress and different anxiety because they were literally doing a war.
They were doing a war and they were in the air, which is a place where humans are not meant to be naturally.
If think about it, you're in the air getting shot at while trying to do maneuvers in a plane that was invented like 4 months ago. It's like, there's a lot going on. First, and also a lot of the times that Foo Fighters were observed was in the dark or in bad weather, which can also affect the way that you perceive and interpret what you're seeing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Most of the Foo Fighter sightings were reported over Europe and the Pacific, but there's others that were seen in many other places. Like there was a lot of fighting in North Africa where some was seen. The phenomenon was widespread, but mostly concentrated in air battles, which was, basically airplanes fighting other airplanes.
Yeah, I've seen Top Gun.
So that's sort of the situation. So technology specifically plays a big role. And I know we were hammering on this, but there's a lot of stuff going on when it comes to radio communication and being able to beam things down to people to tell people about what's going on. Lots of coordination, faster response times. It also means that you could report on things you saw quicker and say, rationalize or think less about what it is you saw, so people can, I have to think about it in a way that that can make complete sense.
Yeah.
So, because in some ways, this is a form of communication that we are very used to and something that will be hard to convey because of norms. So like right now, we're on the internet. We are talking with probably less than a second of delay across thousands of kilometers, or not thousands, like hundreds of kilometers, probably over 1,000 kilometers. We're like on very different parts of the continent. That is wild if you really think about it from a technological point of view. Now, during World War II, using like radio had been used in the past. Like, radio, like 1930s, there was already like radios in most people's homes. But in the sort of chaos of war, that sort of instant level of logistics is, it's still new. It's still novel in some capacity. And in the past, if you saw something weird, you had time to maybe check something out or think about what you saw before you went back and told your story about what happened. If you are in an airplane with a built-in radio, you don't have to land before you report on the thing you saw. You can just call it in.
That's right.
And even if you, think about it and recant and retell your story later, at that time, that like sort of thinking of like, oh, like you're just talking about what you saw in the moment, you're kind of talking off the cuff or whatever, that doesn't, that was less of a thing that people had internalized yet. And so it had been taken, more seriously than maybe it should have. Like if you're saying, oh, I'm seeing lights, and it's moving in a strange way, and then 5 minutes later be like, oh, it's just this. That part doesn't seem to make it into things because
that part doesn't make it in. It's the initial like something weird's happening, man, and everyone's like, all right. Jot that down. Never mind. It was just I got a flare from the sun reflected off the glass and it just made it look weird. And it's like, all right, we don't have to include that part. Just keep the weird part in. That was cool.
Another thing, too, to also add to these sort of alien new technologies that people were seeing at the time, not only were planes getting more powerful, but like the very things that were being used to propel stuff were changing. World War II saw the first jet engines, which like before then propellers were what airplanes were using. So jets are also another thing. Germany also developed the first rockets and like the first like rocket missiles and stuff like that.
Goodness.
So
a lot of stuff's happening.
So there's a lot of stuff in the sky that looks weird. And it's not
a lot of people making stuff for some reason. A lot of people making like really powerful, like weaponized things for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. So basically pilots were seeing all sorts of new stuff under a lot of stress in bad conditions and then reported seeing strange things. And as you know, ideas can be contagious. So if people are hearing reports of seeing strange things in the skies, and there's also just a lot of strange things in the sky because a war's happening and people are developing a lot of new aircraft technology, then you might see some interesting stuff.
And everyone's going to exaggerate that. I mean, I also feel like this too. Like people are going, if you and I are fighter pilot buddies, which we would be in another life, I guarantee it. If you saw something strange in the sky, there would be a part of me that would almost want to try to one up you a little bit too and be like, yeah, well, I saw this happen and it was even weirder than what you saw. I saw two of them and they were dancing. So think about that.
Also keep in mind that like a lot of the people, and this, now that we're, older people, well, a lot of the people fighting this war were like 18 to 22, right? Like
that's true.
So there were people who
learned to become hard to imagine. Yeah.
So like a lot of those people flying those airplanes that were seeing weird things, first of all, learned to become pilots like less than a year ago and were like, juniors in university today.
Oh goodness.
And many of them like in America could not drink today. And also it got picked up by the media, and it weirdly enough, as this always happens, once it got picked up by the media, people started seeing them a lot more often.
That's so strange. That hardly ever happens.
And so a lot of people apparently didn't report these at first because they thought that they were going to be considered like mentally unstable and unreliable, because actually recognizing that people can have mental breaks was sort of a new thing in the military at this time.
Right.
They didn't just like in World War I assume that you were weak and just like tell you to man up and get to the front type thing. And also that people were on the lookout for experimental aircraft and stuff like that. So
of course.
And and they had just learned how to fly.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's all of the sort of sketchy context that it can show that there is a lot of room for non-alien explanations to possibly explain all of the Foo Fighter phenomenon. But then there's then we look into what these things could be. And so after the war, there was an investigation into the phenomenon, and this investigation was done by the USAF, or the U.S. Air Force, and Europe's intelligence in 1945, and the research included former members of the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force.
Gotcha.
And with this group of scientists and engineers looking into this balls of fire phenomenon, they were trying to figure out whether or not there were basically secret German aircraft projects that they just weren't finding. And they basically tried to find an answer, but they found no secret weapons program. And at that point, they sort of just said, okay, we can't explain what the sightings were based on that. Because during the war, there was this wartime theory, and it was revived a little bit later by an author named Renato Vesco, that the Foo Fighters were a secret Nazi weapon that was sort of like it's a weird thing called the Feuerball, which was supposed to be kind of like an air mine.
Feuerball. Okay.
So basically what it would be is like a jet-propelled flak mine that would launch from the ground and intercept airplanes. So it would detect enemies flying over top, and then fire this like rocket-propelled mine basically up into the sky to explode. And that's what he thought it was, like a secret Nazi program to intercept planes like that.
Gotcha. Why is it? So many of these theories that we talk about always come back to this like secret Nazi weapon. It was a secret Nazi weapon, everyone.
Oh, the Nazis did have a lot of secret weapons. As I mentioned earlier in earlier episodes of the show, that there was the Wunderwaffen program, which was like their desperate attempt to develop new technologies with like stuff they had left over in order to make something that would be like an ace in the hole so that they could turn the war around. But the V2 rocket program, which was headed by Dr. Werner von Braun, who used slave labor to build the first rocket-propelled missiles that were used to attack, I think they were used to attack England mostly. And then he went off to become the head of NASA. Fun stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, fun stuff. So there was like the reason why people latch onto it is because there was a bit of it going on, but of course people's imaginations ran wild. They did have an Atomwaffen program where they were trying to develop a nuclear bomb, but they abandoned it very early on. So according to the theory, though, Vesco says that that special SS units had these Feuerballs, which is the German word for fireball.
Okay.
That were sort of tortoise shell shaped things. So basically, like blue shells. They were loading cannons with blue shells from Mario Kart and firing them at things. And because of them, they would basically have what are called klystron tubes inside the device that would use gas jets and cause it to look like a glowing sphere.
Oh, looking a little bit like a Foo Fighter.
Mm-hmm. And then also had instructions and sensor mechanisms to basically depart quickly if it was fired upon. And so what it would do is sort of distract and disrupt bomber pilots.
Oh, so it wasn't it was just a distraction.
Yeah.
Sort of a thing. Okay.
Those are the two, like it's sort of, we're kind of running into two theories. So either it's like these are like glowing things to distract bombers so they don't drop their bombs and stuff, or they were air mines.
I like and I know that there's a better explanation, but I like the idea of the bombers just having a very low attention span where it's like, all right, I'm going to go.
Ooh, shiny.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'm going to go bomb this. Oh, what's this?
It's like
hold on 1 second, everyone. I got to check this out. This
dog
looks
from
fun.
Up. Squirrel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is one explanation that people believe that it's some sort of weapon like this. There's no evidence for any of these things existing, but okay. It's a explanation that isn't aliens, and it isn't like the most ridiculous technology. Like it's plausible, but like there's no evidence that makes people think that it actually existed. Another example would be, and this is one that shows up quite a bit in the research, is that it's something called St. Elmo's fire, which is something that wasn't seen a whole lot before airplanes started becoming a thing. I mean, they were seen on like ships and stuff like that. But basically, it's this was going to show up on this show at some point. St. Elmo's fire. It is is, or it's sometimes called witch's fire or witch fire.
Yeah.
And it's basically a phenomenon where there's like during a storm or something like that, when there is a displacement between the electrical charges, there can be this like kind of ball of luminous plasma that creates a corona, especially if it's near something that's mast shaped, like say an antenna or the mast of a ship or a spire or a chimney or even an animal horn. And oftentimes it's seen on the leading edges of airplanes, which, you know, a lot of these pilots who are flying planes that they had never flown before might have seen things like that. Oftentimes there's a hissing or a buzzing sound being heard around it as well. And typically happens during either thunderstorms or volcanic eruptions, but it can happen in a lot of different places. And this is not like ball lightning. This is a reproducible and demonstrated like in a lab type of phenomenon. So
gotcha.
You can Google image search St. Elmo's fire and you will see like real cases of it.
And if you also Google search St. Elmo's fire, you will also hopefully get the kick-ass song St. Elmo's fire. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know that song.
You don't know that song?
No.
Classic, like, I want to say 80s? Yeah, 85. It's one of those like motivational songs, you know, like a motivational 80s montage song. It's so good. Like, let me just, because I wonder what they were talking about. I was like, I don't know what St. Elmo's fire is, but this is a good song. And it talks a lot about the sky. So I wonder if it ties into anything.
Probably.
I can see a new horizon underneath the blazing sky. Yeah, that's a good song.
And like I said, in the past, like in history, St. Elmo's fire was associated with ships because often it would be seen on the masts of old sailing ships.
Heck yeah.
And yeah, so basically what it does is there's an electrical field being built up around it, and that causes the air molecules to ionize and make them glow.
Nature's wild.
Yeah. It turns out we're learning through this podcast and a lot of UFO claims that there's a lot of weird stuff that can happen in the sky. There's a lot of atmospheric phenomenon out there.
There's a lot of weird stuff that just happens naturally, and it's just wild.
Yeah. And they were claiming like, oh, it can't be St. Elmo's fire because it's moving too fast. But you know what else was moving faster than anybody had anticipated at that time? All of the new airplanes that people were only barely able to recognize that were doing all sorts of wild stuff. So if you could imagine, like, this is another part too, is that it could move faster than you think, because if it's at the tip of like the wing of an airplane, right? And if you think about it, like a wing, like the tip of a wing of an airplane will, if there's something glowing on the edge of it and it's like maneuvering, it'll look like it's moving faster than the airplane actually is moving, because, you know, it's like a further away type thing.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And also there are people who have claimed that it could also sound a lot like ball lightning, which again is not a phenomenon that is necessarily untrue. It's just there's lots of references to it, of seeing something that is like a spherical object that glows, typically associated with thunderstorms, but it's never been reproduced in a lab. But it's not a thing, but we just haven't been able to demonstrate what it is.
Yeah, we've talked about it a few times before.
Also, there was an interesting study in 1945 that also might come to the beginning of a conclusion of what this could be, and that is that the Navy started to experiment on nighttime aviators, and specifically the seeing of visual illusions, because apparently a lot of these pilots, especially at nighttime, were experiencing acute vertigo, which is a term for when somebody has a sensation of movement or of surrounding objects moving when they're not. So it could be that they're seeing these things moving or feeling like they're moving faster than they are because they're experiencing vertigo, which was a phenomenon that was happening with pilots flying at night. Vertigo can also be associated with nausea, with vomiting, sweating, problems walking. So that's sort of like, it's dizziness.
Yeah.
I experienced a pretty strong case of this last weekend because I tried VR for the first time.
Oh no.
I tried VR no, it wasn't bad. But like I tried VR for the first time, and one of the last things I did right before it stopped was like a sort of simulated roller coaster ride. And the VR session ended right in the middle of the roller coaster ride, and so it just turned off right away, and then it came off, and I was just like, whoa. Like, it was like, you know that feeling like when it feels like you're moving, but you're not?
Oh, 100%. I was about to say my worst experience with vertigo was many years ago. I was sick with something, who knows? But I went to the doctor and they gave me like some sort of steroid shot to try and, I guess, get my system back in order. And like immediately, like a minute later, I had the worst case of like vertigo I've ever had. Like I was nauseous. I tried to like stand up and literally it was like a cartoon. Like I was seeing lights around me, like dance around my head. And I was just like, what is happening? And I like fell over because I just couldn't figure out which way it was up.
So you could imagine if you were flying an airplane and then you were experiencing some form of that you might see something that you could identify as a UFO.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And so like that's the one explanation that, it's just a very normal physical. Humans don't belong in the sky. Humans, like,
we don't belong there.
That's not our place. Our brains did not evolve to fly fighter planes. So there's gonna be lots of. And furthermore, and this is interesting, is that there's also possibly psychological reasons people might have hallucinated things like that. Which is so there was in this study there was a person by the name of Dr. Edgar Vernacki, who was the flight psychologist on the same project, and came to the idea that on top of the vertigo, basically saying that pilots don't have sufficient information about phenomena of disorientation, and as a corollary are given considerable disorganized, incomplete, and inaccurate information. They are largely dependent on their own experience, which must supplement and interpret the traditions about vertigo which are passed on to them. When a concept thus grows out of anecdotes cemented together with practical necessity, it's bound to acquire elements of mystery. As far as vertigo is concerned, no one really knows more than a small part of the facts, but a great deal of the peril. Since aviators are not skilled observers of human behavior, they usually have only the vaguest understanding of their own feelings. Like other naive persons, therefore, they have simply adopted a term to cover a multitude of otherwise inexplicable events. Which means that it could be that a lot of the Foo Fighter phenomenon is that not only were they experiencing vertigo, but they don't have a good culture of language of teaching people that this is a thing that could happen to you. And and so they were experiencing this, and the only real way that they could understand what was happening to them is through just their own experience, because they weren't taught how to take care of it, and pilots aren't, students of human behavior, and so like they didn't think to teach people that, oh, you might experience this sort of thing, and so then they might have like interpreted it as like, oh yeah, I saw flying objects, because like they don't understand that that's a thing that they could experience on the job.
Yeah.
And so that is another thing, and also they came to the conclusion that it might be something called combat fatigue, which was a term during World War II. And luckily it's better understood today, but that the impacts of war and combat on service members can cause a multitude of weird physiological and psychological issues. Today, combat fatigue is called post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, during World War I, it was called shell shock, and they were basically considered a form of cowardice, and you were just sent back to the front lines if you were brought down with it, unless like you completely shut down. World War I, great war, did so many great things to people. But during World War II, they did start to acknowledge that there was a thing going on with people that did develop into sort of an understanding of PTSD as it is today. And you can imagine, again, PTSD is also known with flashbacks and hallucinations and stuff like that if it's very, very acute. So it could also be that war was messing with people's heads, because if you think about it, if you're a fighter pilot who is regularly coming in close calls with death in the sky, possibly a trigger of triggering your PTSD and seeing things in the sky that you're trained to be terrified when you see those kinds of things could be a phenomenon, right? PTSD is all about reliving traumatic things in your life, and if you are regularly experiencing combat while in the cockpit of a fighter plane, then those kinds of things could come up to like trigger your PTSD.
Absolutely, 100%.
All of those sound like much more logical explanation, and also you have PTSD, you have that sort of little bit of vertigo, see some spots, and it triggers that you're like, your PTSD of seeing fast moving objects around you in an airplane, and all of a sudden you can see there's a lot of reasons why. And also keep in mind that those sorts of experiences are happening on both sides of the war. Japanese fighter pilots are also getting vertigo, and they're also getting PTSD, German fighter pilots too. And same with American, every side of the war was fought by people, and people experience these kinds of phenomena.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of those reasons do. Yeah, I mean, just pile them on top of each other, and yeah, I mean, it makes to me, it makes more sense.
And also just keep in mind that it's a very chaotic situation where a lot of new things are being seen all the time too.
Yeah.
And so while there's there probably isn't one explanation as to what Foo Fighters are, but is a combination of people seeing strange things through these variable different ways that it could happen.
Yeah. And not having and as you were saying, not having the language to really describe what it is or understand what it is necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And furthermore, I mentioned that whole thing about new technology with trekking and stuff like that. And one of the things that the Foo Fighters did not do is show up on radar. It's all of them come from eyewitness accounts. And as we established in my UAP episode, although we have a lot of corrections to talk about with the UAP episode, one of the things that does give some of them more credibility is that they were observed on multiple different measurement tools. And if these Foo Fighters had been seen on radar, which did exist, it would have been a bit more credible, but they were not.
But they did not, no.
And it wasn't until the 1950s that we actually developed technology that could be resistant to radar, although I guess you could just write that off as, aliens. They have
aliens
radar
are resistant
proof.
to radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, there was an attempt to try and explain what everything was. In 1953, the CIA put together a panel to try and explain what it was. But at the end of the day, they came to no official conclusion as to what it could be. My explanation is that it's a variety of things based on new technology, stressful situations, and just a lot of stuff in the air without others knowing. Because you think about it, during war, you don't have flight plans of where the Germans are going to be doing their bombing runs. So you don't know what's going to be up in the sky, where and when. And then as the Foo Fighter idea started to become a media phenomenon, people started to shape their stories around the common attributes seen in the media reports. So what is in some cases vertigo, what is in some cases St. Elmo's fire, or bombs or rockets or flak or whatever, all gets lumped into one category and a narrative starts getting built around it. And again, has way fewer assumptions than faster than light travel.
Very much so. And so I think at the end of this, I can see a new horizon underneath the blazing sky. I'll be where the eagle's flying, higher and higher. That's the
St. Elmo's fire song.
Gonna be a man in motion. All I need is a pair of wheels. Take me where my future's lying. St. Elmo's fire. That's what it is.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for your poem today.
I wrote it myself. Yeah.
You know where we can find more poetry by Scott? It's at Probs Not Aliens on Twitter. There, I just set you up for some very fun tweets.
How about this? Send us your best poems.
Send us your best, what's it called?
Give us a
Fighter-related poem.
Give us a Foo Fighter haiku. A haiku fighter.
Haiku fighter? Yeah, there you go.
At Probs Not Aliens on Twitter and Instagram. Gotta post there more.
Mm-hmm.
You can send us topics to talk about by DMing us on Instagram. How about that?
Yeah.
More engagement.
Do it up.
That sounds fun. Tristan, where can people find you outside of this show?
I make a YouTube channel called Step Back where I talk about the past and basically use the past to talk about understanding the world as it is today to maybe make it better tomorrow. Use the past to talk about the present to make it better tomorrow. There you go. There's a tagline.
That's a good tagline.
Yeah. My recent video is on the long and deep history of trans people, and I'm very, very proud of it. And by the time this episode should be airing, it should be out. It's already out on Nebula, but it should be out everywhere. Now, Scott, if I wanted to learn about why the new Minty Kaling show, Velma, is not good, but at the same time also wanted to just completely break down in tears over the creative process in, say, a Miyazaki film, where would I go to get that specific combination of very eclectic videos?
That's a wild combo, and no one else has the balls to do it except for me. On my YouTube channel, Nerdsync, Nerdsync, I made a video about Whisper of the Heart, which is one of my favorite Studio Ghibli films, with my partner Emily. We did it together, and then that didn't get many views, so then I turned around and I made a review of the first two episodes of the new HBO show Velma, because I'm a big Scooby-Doo fan, and that got a ton of views, and so I used it to plug the Whisper of the Heart video. Now that video is doing a lot better.
The
so
Whisper
thank
of the
you
Heart
to everyone
video
who actually did.
Whisper of the Heart video is genuinely like one of the best Nerdsync videos, so watch it.
Thank you. They're both good videos in their own right. I had a lot of fun making both of them. Go check it out. Thank you to everyone who writes reviews of this show on Apple Podcasts and leaves ratings on Spotify. It really does help us out. And just, tell your friends about the show. Tell your friends.
Listen.
Do you have friends? Tristan, how many friends have you told
about the show? I have actually several friends who listen to the podcast and tell me about it regularly, so I guess enough.
Excellent. That's great. And a great place to send people is propsnotaliens.com. That's where we got links to everywhere where you can listen to this show. And of course, reminder, you can also listen to the show one episode earlier on Nebula as soon as I get back to editing, because I'm moving.
Excellent. Well, Scott, I feel like this has been a great one, but that's all for now.
Until next time, I'm Scott Nicewander.
I'm Tristan Johnson, and the truth is out there. Whoa, probably.
Oh no, he's got vertigo.
Yeah, that was my vertigo.
Don't throw up on the microphone. It's a nice microphone.
It is. It's nice. Hello, microphone.